May I speak in the name of our loving, liberating, and life-giving God. Amen.
Amen.
For a few years while I was in elementary school, a musical about Holy Week and Easter called I Am, mounted by a renowned local choir, swept through Northeast Ohio. It was a dramatic retelling of Jesus' final days, his triumphant entry into Jerusalem atop a donkey, palm branches laid before him by the crowd, the Last Supper, an institution of the Eucharist, washing his disciples' feet, his betrayal, arrest, and crucifixion. Of course, the entire production built toward the resurrection, the joyful promise of Easter. I have two distinct memories of this musical. First was the year that my family attended I Am at an unfamiliar church in a town unfathomably far away, like 25 minutes from our home or something equally absurd. Our family was a part of a group that attended from our parish, and grown-ups made a big old deal about it, dressing up, making us dress up, arriving super early. It was all pretty unbearable. I remember playing hide-and-go-seek before the show with a gaggle of kids, taking refuge in a women's restroom we all agreed was haunted, and only emerging when a friend's mom came to retrieve us. The play was a bit like church, and I felt a mix of interest and boredom as we sat through its various movements. Though still so young, I'd attended Holy Week services before and found the entire concept of sacrifice deeply moving, a sensitivity I see in many young children. And so I was particularly transfixed by the parts about Jesus' betrayal, especially his prayer in the garden that the cup would be taken from him. The idea that he might have been able to avoid the pain and terror of the cross, but chose not to, for the good of his friends, for the good of the world, took my breath away. One particular song touching on these themes has stayed with me all these years. Jesus had just been sold to the Roman soldiers by his friend Judas and was being led away from the garden. Mary Magdalene laments the injustice, offers to help him escape, pours out her pain and grief at the thought of losing him, and he sings in response, "Don't cry for me, it's almost done. It's just what I've longed to do. Don't cry for me. There is no pain as great as my love for you." I would sing it, but all these years later, I would still start ugly crying. Apparently, the adults were also moved because the next year, our parish hosted the production of I Am, and our adult and junior choirs were invited to sing along with the semi-professional group. I remember joining one of the rehearsals, us kids standing in front of the adults and marveling at the powerful voices of the women behind us, soaring over high F's and G's, trilling around high A's like hummingbirds in flight. The play ran throughout Lent. My costume looked like and might very well have been a burlap sack. And I, the youngest kid in the production, had a very special job. While everyone sang the sublimely sad song about Jesus' death, about the tearing of the curtain and the earthquake and the cold, dark tomb, I slipped away, crept along the highway behind the stage, all familiar because this was my home turf, and tiptoed unseen through the kitchen to the back of the cavernous parish hall. I waited and waited for the big Easter number to begin, for slowly, quietly, like a whisper, like a secret, and then building, 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 until there it was, my cue. And I'd start running down the aisle, shaking the arms of unsuspecting audience members as the percussion was getting louder and louder and shouting, "He is risen! He is risen!" Until finally, I made my way back to the stage, and we sang the big concluding number. He is risen forevermore. He is risen. He has opened heaven's door. The chains of death have been released, and we have been set free. I loved that refrain, not only because it was so triumphant, but because it meant my brief brush with acting was over. It seemed like I should have been pleased to have the special role of announcing Jesus' resurrection, but I didn't like being the center of that kind of attention. I found it exquisitely embarrassing. I wasn't into plays and musicals like some of my friends. It just didn't suit me. Back in the choir, I could blend back in. My voice, one of many, my familiar place, secure. I don't know why the directors of I Am wanted a child to announce Jesus' resurrection. Probably they thought it was cute. But a far more biblically accurate choice would have been an adult woman. All of the Gospels attest to this truth, that the men, still reeling from Jesus' arrest, still coming to terms with their own cowardice, still ashamed of having abandoned and betrayed their beloved friend, were nowhere to be found that first Easter morn. It was the women, including his mother, including Mary Magdalene, and including, in some Gospels, a whole bunch of others, who stayed with him while he was being put to death by the Roman state, who kept vigil at the cross, who received his still warm body after he had breathed his last. And it was a woman, Mary Magdalene, who went to the tomb the next morning while it was still dark and saw that the stone had been rolled away. Not excited, but confused, she ran to tell Peter and the beloved disciples that something was terribly wrong. Fearing the worst, she told them that Jesus' body had been taken. The two men come and investigate the scene, but they're no real help. No one knows what has happened. No one knows what to do. The whole chaotic back and forth apparently wouldn't play well in a suburban Cleveland basement in the 90s because it was missing entirely from the script of I Am. How messy and unflattering for the disciples. But Mary, John's gospel continues, didn't go anywhere. She stood in the garden weeping beside the tomb, still so concerned, so heartbroken, so afraid. And so it is Mary who is present to see the two angels. It is Mary who eventually turns around and sees a man she assumes to be the gardener. This is more than a sweet misunderstanding. It's a wonderful mirror of the story of creation. We have a garden and a man and a woman, as it was in the beginning. Only this time, the ending will not be marred by shame, estrangement, and exile. This time, what once was broken, what once was lost, will be restored. "Woman," the man says to her, "why are you weeping?" Inconsolable, she repeats for the third time that her Lord is missing, that he has been taken away. Her grief spiral is only broken by the sound of her own name, and in an instant, she recognizes who it is before her. Finally, she sees. "Teacher," she cries. And then Jesus says the strangest thing, "Do not hold on to me," and commissions her as the first apostle of the resurrection, sending her out as the first evangelist of this good news. "Go to my brothers," he commands, and she goes, saying, "I have seen the Lord." In the musical version of this story, we all know that the resurrection is good news. But in the biblical version, that seems much less obvious. What if I Am ended with Mary rushing down the aisle crying, "I have seen the Lord," to a traumatized group of young men who nod numbly, who listen dumbly, and then relock the door to the upper room, pull the shades, and resume their watchful, terrified guard. It would not have made for an inspiring Friday evening in Lent, but it would have been closer to the heart of the story, handed down from generation to generation by the church. If the disciples received Mary's good news with joy, the Gospels do not say. In Matthew and Luke, the reality is even more stark. The women go to the disciples, and the disciples, and I quote, do not believe them. I loved the musical I Am. I'm so grateful I carry the memories of that play within me. But I'm not sure I Am prepared me, or anyone really, for what it's actually like to be a disciple of Jesus. In our rush to tell a triumphant story, to celebrate, to dig into that Easter roast and get on with the egg hunt already, we miss the much more troubling truth that the first Easter was more disturbing than joyful, more chaotic than exciting. I love a good brunch and consider chocolate a food group, so don't get me wrong here. Celebrating Easter is fantastic. But if we pretend that the story at its heart was an obviously happy one, we might be tempted to assume the living of our faith should be like that too, which might make us think we've done something wrong when we find ourselves doubting, despairing, disconnected. Or worse, make us worry God has forgotten us in our seasons of sorrow and suffering. An overly saccharine Easter leaves us unprepared for the reality of a life of faith. Because if we are willing to do what Mary did, courageous, visionary Mary, and actually go, bearing the good news of Jesus' resurrection to those to whom we are sent, the way is likely to be lonely and hard. It's going to involve sharing life with the people that Jesus did, the unsheltered and despised, the sick and sinners. It's going to mean voluntarily giving up the power and privilege we might otherwise enjoy in order to move closer to the margins and share life with those left out and discarded by the world. It's going to involve going to your old friends like Mary to the disciples, bearing the great good news that something far more wonderful is possible for them than the dream of endless consumption and accomplishment and winning sold to us by our culture. And facing their disbelief, judgment, and even rejection. Probably the most practically helpful thing I learned from singing in I Am is that being a person of faith is profoundly uncomfortable, even potentially embarrassing. That following Jesus means not only offering my gifts, but the far less impressive parts of me. Means moving well beyond my comfort zones and doing things I've never done and might not even want to do. Recently, I read a reflection by a seminary professor and priest who realized after decades in academia that she was being called into parish ministry. She loved her job. She found research and writing exhilarating, thrived in high-stress environments, and found particular pleasure mentoring graduate students and teaching. She wasn't particularly pastoral. She worried she didn't have the patience for a parish. And despite her confidence leading a seminar, she found preaching utterly terrifying. But as her career was peaking, she began to sense a tug in her morning prayer time toward something new, found herself crying while singing hymns, began fantasizing about standing behind the altar week after week, not just once in a while. It was during this time that Easter came, and she heard Jesus' words to Mary as if for the first time. Finally recognizing who is before her, Mary calls her friend Rabboni, or teacher, for this is how she had known him. She was the student. He was the teacher. She was the follower. He was the leader. She had questions, he had answers. And in response, Jesus says to his beloved companion, "Do not hold on to me." The professor suddenly realized that Jesus was telling Mary that it was time for their relationship to change. No longer could he be the one in charge, the one leading the charge, the one bearing the good news. It was her job now. They'd come up together, grown up together, and now it was time for her to step into the next phase of their relationship, the next phase of her ministry. It was a wonderful calling, we can only assume, to be the apostle to the apostles. What an honor. But it also marked the end of a way of relating that Mary had known and loved. Things had changed. Jesus had changed. And now she had to change too. My guess is that many of us still think of Easter in terms of what we learned about it as children. And if you learned what Reverend Julie is teaching the kiddos right now, that the good news of Easter is that God's love is so powerful and persistent that it will always come find you no matter how far you go, then you might be good. But if you learned something closer to the story of I Am, that Easter is an easy win, a slam dunk, that being a disciple is about feeling proud and happy and at ease, that a life of faith is one of perfection and comfort, well, maybe we have some growing up to do, too. Maybe Jesus is tapping us on the shoulder this morning and saying, I love being the safe harbor, the comforting shepherd, the gentle mother hen, and I will always be with you in those ways. But do not hold on to me. Do not hold on to a smaller version of our relationship than we both know is possible. Who knows? Maybe from here, Jesus will send us into the garden, into the upper room, out to the margins. Maybe Jesus will call us to be apostles at work, on our morning walk, in line at the grocery store, in the city council meeting, to say the true thing that needs to be said, to interrupt the conflict with a reconciling word, to model solidarity with those rejected and dehumanized by the powerful. So I can't help but wonder, is there a familiar role, relationship, or identity that God is calling you out of? Is there a way of being in the world that you have outgrown? Are you a teacher being called to become a student? Are you an employee being called to start something new? Are you a caregiver ready to receive some rest and ease? Are you a pleaser who more and more just needs to speak their mind? Don't be discouraged when risking those first steps into new life feels scary and weird and uncomfortable. And do not listen to any voice that says you are alone. The great good news of the resurrection is that though Jesus sends us out, he does not send us away. Miraculously, he is there in the closed room right after Mary. He is by the seashore. He shows up in all the closed-off places, like locked homes and locked hearts. May we not settle for a smaller gospel than the gospel of Jesus. May today mark precisely the new beginning you have been waiting for. Amen.